Good evening and welcome to tonight's Globespan discussion program. My name is Rusat Ramgopal. I'll be your host tonight. Our guests are Mr. Timothy Jonas, Senior Counsel and Chairman of a New United Guyana, Mr. Harold Miller, a City Council candidate in New York for District 27, and later in the program we will be joined by Mr. Eric Adams, the Brooklyn Borough President candidate for New York City Mayor. So our program tonight will focus on Guyana and our discussions with Mr. Jonas, as well as the 2021 New York City elections and how they relate to the West Indian community over here. So we thank all our guests for joining tonight. Mr. Jonas and Mr. Miller are with us now. Mr. Adams will join in at around 7:15 p.m. My first question would be to Mr. Jonas. I'll ask you about the recent political developments in Guyana related to the election petition case, and that was dismissed recently, but there are plans for appeal. What is your take on the election petition case, how the APNU, their recent statements, and also the PP's response to that?
APNU have been at a disadvantage from day one. Half of the country says, show me your SOPs, and APNU can't show the SOPs. I'm afraid when they started out poorly by announcing that the elections had gone well and that they had their SOPs, and their SOPs showed that they'd won the elections. And it was hard to move away from that original position to conduct a campaign to persuade people that the elections had been unfairly decided against them without showing those SOPs. That effort reached the court, so that both election petitions filed in court were filed on procedural, technical grounds, rather than on the very straightforward ground that here are my SOPs, I won. So the second petition, which was dismissed recently, as you know, turned on the contention by the APNU folk that procedurally, GCOM did not have the right to recount, that GCOM were obligated to accept the result that was announced by their officials after the first count. It's an argument that could never float, for the simple reason that if you know that your officer or your employee has been guilty of fraud, there is no system on earth that will compel you to mindlessly accept the fraud that was done and to follow that fraud to its logical conclusion. And the Constitution very specifically empowers GCOM to do everything necessary to ensure a fair result. And when GCOM had reservations about the propriety of Mingo's declaration, GCOM were therefore quite entitled under the Constitution, Article 162, to say we're going to count this thing again. And the procedure by which they did that, namely Order 60, done under Section 22 of the Act, the Chief Justice found, and to me it was an inevitable conclusion, that it was correctly done, so that GCOM, the body with responsibility to ensure the elections were properly conducted, did its job by rejecting an announcement and a result by Mingo that was clearly suspect and that courts had previously adjudicated upon and said had been done wrongly. And therefore GCOM did its job properly. That does not get into the personnel of the GCOM board and how the vote swings in there. But at the end of the day, to me, it was the inevitable conclusion by the Chief Justice.
All right, thank you, Mr. Jonas. And just to follow up on that, moving forward from these cases, the election dispute, is the possibility or lack thereof of any work between the government and the opposition? I mean, you had the statement from Joseph Harman, the leader of the opposition, again trying to question the legitimacy of the government, and President Ali today questioning whether or not he could be able to work with such an opposition. Do you see areas where the government and the opposition could potentially work together? I mean, there's been this campaign to end filaria in Guyana, where you do see some support across the political spectrum, and you also have the the COVID vaccine programs that has been going well so far. 25% of Guyanese adults have received a first dose. Do you see areas like this, maybe public health issues could be areas where the government and the opposition can work together for the betterment of Guyana?
I think that may conflate a number of issues. There are some issues that are non-political, and absolutely everybody in Guyana, whatever side of the fence you're on, will try to get them done. The vaccinations is one. Anyone will say go and get vaccinated. We need to get herd immunity. The vaccinations have proven effective, and we all need to show that we are participating by going to be vaccinated as soon as we can. I don't see that translates to political cooperation. And unfortunately, by their conduct, APNU have so alienated PPP's supporters that politically speaking, the PPP will not get a single sound of dissent, a single criticism from any of its supporters by playing tit for tat and saying, well, you're not talking to us, we won't talk to you. And of course, in our political structure, PPP is very comfortable to do that because it means they can run the country on their own. So APNU have foolishly carried this further than they should have, and have made it very easy for the government to simply shrug and say it's very difficult to work with these people, look at their position, and then enjoy total power, which is what we're seeing now.
Thank you, Mr. Jonas. I'll ask a question to Mr. Miller now, and before I do the transition, I'll just say I think it's a great way to look at it. What you just said, that there's some issues that should not be political. Unfortunately, with the pandemic, at times I'll just say from a U.S. point of view, sometimes that there are issues that you'd hope would not have ended up political, but did end up political. But moving towards the U.S. and New York politics, Mr. Harold Miller joins us tonight. He is a city council candidate in District 27. So, Mr. Miller, could you introduce yourself to our audience and tell them about your campaign, how the race is going so far, and what is the office you are running for?
Thank you for having me. Great to be on the program this evening. I am running for city council in District 27, which is the communities of Southeast Queens, more specifically St. Albans, Cambria Heights, Queens Village, Hollis, parts of Springfield Gardens, and parts of South Jamaica. And before going to the platform, just a little background of who I am. I am of Guyanese descent. I was my grandparents, immigrated from Guyana to the United States, and I was raised by my grandparents, and so learned a lot about the Guyanese culture, and very proud of my background and heritage. I'm a husband, father of two boys, a 7 and a 3-year-old, and I've been a community organizer for almost 20 years. I'm also a former deputy commissioner in the mayor's office, where I got to work within government and get to work with all the city agencies. So I worked in the de Blasio administration for almost 7 years. And during that time, I helped establish universal pre-K, work with faith leaders in New York City to build affordable housing. And during the pandemic, I was appointed campaign director for our Test and Trace Corps, where I was working with our medical teams to do education outreach to New Yorkers all throughout the city. And, making sure that folks were wearing their masks, getting tested for COVID-19, and helping to establish locations where we can have testing sites. And so I'm running for city council because I have a history of getting things done. From my days of community organizing, I organized homeowners who fought against foreclosures, organized fast food workers who wanted higher wages, and organized for improvements in our education system. And so I'm going to carry that same spirit of advocacy, as well as my knowledge of city government, into the city council, where we want to address issues such as housing security in our district, transportation improvements, as well as making sure that monies that's coming from the recovery, both on the federal and city and state level, are getting into the hands of our community, particularly our small businesses. And so, you know, my race, it's a very crowded field. It's an open seat. This is a big election year here in New York City, where we have I'm going to elect a new mayor, a new city comptroller, as well as almost 30 new city council members, including in District 27. So, you know, I'm running on my experience as well as my advocacy of getting things done.
All right, thank you, Mr. Miller. As a Guyanese American yourself, I wonder, could you expand on what would your message be to other Guyanese Americans and members of the West Indian American community, in particular, as you're campaigning? I mean, Guyanese Americans form, I think it's the second largest foreign-born population in Queens, and you're running in Jamaica, Queens, and that area. But we don't tend to have as much representation as we probably should in city government. So what is your message to the Guyanese American community in particular and the West Indian American community in general?
Well, I will say this is that, you know, I am running to represent all the members of District 27, but I also understand the unique concerns that that Guyanese Americans have in our district and in our city as a whole. And I'll make sure a lot of those issues of making sure we protect our small businesses, making sure that our homes are protected, you know, making sure that we have access to, you know, quality healthcare, quality jobs are addressed, and that that no community, particularly the Guyanese community, will be left behind when I'm in the city council. And so, you know, I'm very proud of my background and heritage, and I have a lot of support within the Guyanese community, and because my work and history has always been about bringing people together and always about making sure that all of our interests are addressed at the forefront. And, you know, we'll take a backseat to anybody, particularly those of the rich and powerful in the city. And so, you know, I'm honored to have the broad-based support that I do have, and very honored to have fellow Guyanese Americans to support this campaign.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Now, as we talk about COVID and how our communities are going to recover from COVID and build back from COVID, something that has been in the news in the U.S. and in Guyana, so it's a question to both of you, is the issue of some sort of vaccine passport. So the term has been used to describe a variety of different things. In the minds of some, it means just a certificate of vaccination, while in others, it can be some form of a digital thing like an app. So in the U.S., there have been concerns expressed about whether or not that would infringe on privacy if it is something digital. And the federal government said they would not do it. Andrew Cuomo's state government in New York has said that is something that they are looking at, possibly doing some type of digital app, vaccine passport. And in Guyana today, President Irfan Ali said that Guyana is exploring the ideas of a digital or paper vaccine passport. So as our societies start to recover from COVID and reopen, I would like your positions on the issue of vaccine passports. To what extent do you think that some type of certificate is necessary and appropriate, and at what point does it potentially infringe on personal liberties and privacy? So I'll ask Mr. Jonas that first, and then Mr. Miller. Mr. Jonas, I believe you're on mute. Sorry.
Well, I'm assuming when you say passport, you mean a document to allow you to travel somewhere. And that's not a new concept. I went to Brazil many years ago. I had to get the yellow fever vaccine and have to show that documentation before entering Brazil. We now have a pandemic, and I don't think that it is a privacy issue to say to someone that before you come into
So I think that the privacy concerns come more from the idea of a digital one than a paper one. Like as you said correctly, some sort of paper certification has been used for a while in terms of traveling between countries. I think the idea of a digital one is what has led to certain concerns. I mean, in the UK, it was a big issue recently. Prime Minister Boris Johnson said he would do it, and his Conservative backbench had a mini rebellion of sorts, and he eventually had to back down from the idea.
It really turns on how they go about it. If it is to enable you to travel to access an area. I think the methodology really doesn't impact on the bottom line, that you have a choice if you want to travel there or not. And if you think that this will infringe your privacy, you get to stay home. So at the end of the day, it's a choice that you make. To me, an invasion of privacy occurs where you're not given an option. Given the importance of the pandemic and the dangers that we have seen, I would be surprised if many people protested against the requirement that you are vaccinated and you prove it before you're allowed to go into an area. This is something that's happened since the 13th century, the plague. I mean, you have a potential danger to a society, and you protect the society the best way you can. And I don't see that this impacts privacy, because the choice at the end of the day is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Mr. Miller, what is your view on the issue of vaccine certificates, vaccine passport, paper or digital? Oh, sorry, you are on mute.
Oh, I just want to kind of set the stage that, I want to encourage everyone to get vaccinated. I recently got myself vaccinated, and I have been, talking about making sure people get vaccinated all along. Though I want to just caution that there are some people who are not comfortable taking a vaccine just yet, or for whatever concerns that they may choose not to. And, I want to make sure that their rights are not infringed upon, and being able to, work or travel when necessary or when able to. Though we are still in a pandemic, the idea of the vaccine is to really protect the individual. And so some people may just feel like they don't need that level of protection. So I'm very leery about having a digital a record, saved on who's vaccinated and who's not, as a means of being able to go from point A to point B. If a country chooses to, show, to prove you are vaccinated, that's their choosing. But I also want to make sure that those who, for whatever reason, are not comfortable or have issues with the vaccines, are not, their rights are not infringed upon, being able to work, travel, do the things that they would do in society.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. My next question. So, as we all are encouraging people to get vaccinated if they can, is the issue of how to combat vaccine hesitancy that can be the result of misinformation at times. So, especially in immigrant communities like the Guyanese community, you can have sometimes people don't have, or at least they feel like they don't have the proper access to the right information, and sometimes misinformation can be spread among them. Just take a fun example or not so fun example of a WhatsApp group. Somebody can see an article, somebody got COVID after getting a vaccine. It's a 1 in a million type thing, but they forward it around. That goes to 50 different people at one time, and now you have 50 different people who are now at least a little bit more skeptical getting that vaccine. So how could we deal with our communities, Guyanese American community and in Guyana as well? How could we deal with combating the misinformation that can be spread at times that can lead to vaccine hesitancy as we all are trying to get vaccinated and get out of this pandemic? I'll ask Mr. Miller that first and then Mr. Jonas.
Well, what we have been doing here in New York is constantly having teams of people from the Department of Health to the Health and Hospitals Corporation here in New York City, going out and, talking to folks directly about the safety of the vaccine, how safe it is. And it also is going to take other validators, faith leaders, celebrities, others who have some influence on communities, being able to let people know that it is safe. And that's why I talk about myself getting vaccinated. I enjoy having a platform running for office. And so everywhere I go and every opportunity I can speak, I talk about why I did it. I got vaccinated because I want my family to be safe. I want to make sure that I protect my family and protect my neighbors and my friends, and making sure that we're all able to recover and not have to adhere to mask mandates. And, for some people, that may work. And for others, it may want to hear a different message, may want to hear. So we have to constantly, put it out there of the reasons why. And everyone has their own reason why. But I think everyone who has done it or planning to do so should talk about why, and be very honest and upfront with their neighbors, their friends, and family members. And also understand that hesitancy comes in all sorts of reasons. We have folks who, have medical issues that they're afraid of, taking a vaccine because of what they read on the news. Some, it might be a cultural reason or religious. We have to meet people where they are and work through them on, why this vaccine is so important. There's a lot of folks who don't take the flu vaccine or many others. And so we have to kind of take this long view approach about getting many people vaccinated as possible, but also understanding it's going to take some time to achieve herd immunity, to achieve everyone feeling comfortable with the efficacy of the vaccines.
Yeah, you're muted, Rusat.
Sorry, Mr. Jonas. Well, thank you, Mr. Miller. Mr. Jonas, the same topic to you on the issue of misinformation and how you can combat that, especially as it leads to vaccine hesitancy.
One of the issues with social media and the information age is that you are overwhelmed with information, and you hear equally plausible tales from both sides of the divide. So the conspiracy theorists throw at you, and the scientists throw at you. And that's a difficult fight. That's something that's really difficult to fight against. For me, what I think people eventually listen to and what people eventually see is, first of all, when their leaders don't just send them to the front, but their leaders go and get the vaccine. And I think that one of the things that's been happening in Guyana that is really good is that the leaders have been very publicly on TV getting their vaccines and leading from the front, showing people that, first of all, it's not harmful. You're not going to grow a tail and horns and start speaking Russian. So you demystify some of the theories right away. I think that the second thing that will come to help is eventually, as more and more people take the vaccine, the statistics will show, and they're already showing it, something that gave me comfort, that the people who take the vaccine are not dying. When you hear about COVID deaths, it is people who have not been vaccinated. And to me, that says a lot. So you could talk about theories, you could talk about conspiracies, you could, and I've heard pastors in church decry the vaccine. But if at the end of the day, of 100 people who get COVID, those who die are not vaccinated, that's the bottom line. And I think those statistics need to get out so that that will reassure people. You're muted again, Rusat.
Sorry, if we could just take a quick commercial break and then come back. I'm having Mr. Adams on the phone right now, and we're going to have him come on the program just now. All right.
AllFromOneSupplier.com has all your grocery needs, plus all of your West Indian items. Purchase all your groceries and all your West Indian items from one place and get free delivery to your homes and free shipping. AllFromOneSupplier.com has free deliveries locally in New York and free shipping to all U.S. states. Our shoppers choose the best items, packaged nicely, and delivered to your home. We have all your grocery needs and all your West Indian items, a one-stop shop. So place all your orders on allfromonesupplier.com or call 718-551-3292. That's online at allfromonesupplier.com or call 718-551-3292. Get all your groceries and all your West Indian items from allfromonesupplier.com with free deliveries and free shipping to all U.S. states. Travelspan offers all airlines, such as American, Caribbean, and JetBlue. So let Travelspan compare all airlines and offer you the best fare. Call Travelspan at 718-845-0437 for the lowest deals between New York, Miami, and Guyana. That's Travelspan at 718-845-0437. Call Travelspan in New York at 718-845-0437, Georgetown at 227-1701, or Berbice at 337-4287. In New York, 718-845-0437, Georgetown 227-1701, or Berbice 337-4287, and West Coast Demerara at 269-0140. Let Travelspan book you the best deals for you and your families. Travelspan now has travel and shipping services. Shop online and deliver to Travelspan to handle all of your shipping to Guyana and Trinidad. Travelspan brings 26 years of experience in the travel business. Travelspan will clear your items and have it available at any of our offices in Guyana or Trinidad. So go online and purchase your item, then let Travelspan handle all the shipping. Shop and ship made easy with Travelspan, with offices in New York, Georgetown, Berbice, West Coast Demerara, and Trinidad. Travelspan, serving you with your airlines and shipping needs. Call in New York 718-845-0437, and in Guyana call 227-1701. That's in New York 718-845-0437, and in Guyana 227-1701. And in Trinidad call 672-2060. That's 672-2060. Allfromonesupplier.com is promoting Gaisuku sugar as a way to support Guyana sugar industry. Purchase your Gaisuku sugar from allfromonesupplier.com along with your West Indian and American groceries. Purchasing Gaisuku sugar is a good fate gesture to help restore the sugar industry. Allfromonesupplier.com has free shipping and delivery, and we ship to all states and free deliveries in New York. Log on to allfromonesupplier.com or call 718-551-3292. That's allfromonesupplier.com or 718-551-3292.
And we're back now with Mr. Eric Adams as well. Eric Adams is the Brooklyn Borough President and candidate for Mayor of New York. We are very happy to have him on tonight. Thank you very much, Mr. Adams, for coming on.
Thank you. It's good to see you.
So could you tell our viewers about your campaign so far and how the race is going?
We are extremely excited about the race. We are a little over 50 days remaining, and all of the indicators of a successful campaign are in place for our campaign. We've raised the most money out of any candidate that's running. Our campaign has raised over $9.1 million. And we have over $8 million remaining. And so we're starting to go up on air and radio and social media with a real full blast to get our message out. Second, one of the tabloids here in the city reported, after doing an analysis of all the campaigns, they stated Eric Adams has the broadest base coalition out of any other candidate that is running. We also have an amazing volunteer base. Every week on Thursday, we have anywhere from 150 to 200 volunteers who are excited and ready to go. And the message is the right message. I'm in Brooklyn. Brooklyn is the largest borough in New York City. We have 5 counties in New York City, and Brooklyn is the largest. And I was raised in Queens, which allows me to be a son of 2 counties. And so we have deep roots in both locations, and we're going to really mobilize the groups, organizations, and other volunteers. We have the most elected officials who have endorsed our candidacy. We have the most unions who are behind us, and we believe that we're trending in the right direction, and we're excited about the outcome of this race.
Thank you, Mr. Adams. So it's a crowded field, but you're a leading contender. Recent in the news, you have Ruben Diaz Jr. recently endorsed you, Fernando Ferrer, both were prominent politicians in their own right in New York City, and you're also one of the most experienced candidates. You have been able to work with different diverse communities over your years in your position and in your campaign so far. So what is your message to the West Indian community and the Guyanese community in particular? The Guyanese community's second largest foreign-born population in Queens, fifth largest in New York City. And I guess over the years, sometimes we feel like we didn't get as much attention as we deserve, but we're getting the attention we deserve from you tonight. You took the time to come on. So what's your message to the Guyanese and West Indian American community?
And you haven't. Your perception is real. We have not looked at the powerful voice of the Guyanese community and the Caribbean diaspora, to be honest with you. And I was proud to get the endorsement of District Leader David, who is a Guyanese American out in the Richmond Hill area. It was an extremely significant endorsement for me because he understands how important it is to mobilize the Guyanese vote and also to have a clear message. You're going to be part of my government. You're going to see yourselves in the higher levels of government in City Hall when I'm the mayor of this city. And to hear firsthand, what are those things that are important to you? You know what I've learned far too often? People want to dictate to communities what they need. I say you come with your list. We know that this is a big city with many different needs, but if we come with a clear list of things that the community believes is important, we are able to utilize City Hall to look after those historical problems that you have been facing. And I have been communicating with many of my Guyanese leaders as we are mobilizing together on the ground and saying, come up with the items that you believe are important to you so that we can zero in on them. After my first term in office, once we agree on that list and shake hands, we're going to accomplish everything on that list. We say to elected officials all the time that they have never produced anything for our community. But the truth is, we have never asked them. We have never been specific and direct. We need to do that. We don't want to leave it for chance. We don't want someone else to dictate for us. We want to make sure that as we address the bigger picture of the city, that we're addressing those issues that are specific for your community.
Thank you so much, Mr. Adams. So now you talk about the list of things Guyanese Americans and our community leaders look for. One thing that has been on the list over the years and was a topic during the de Blasio administration is the issue of public school holidays and whether or not Hindu holidays such as Holi or Diwali would eventually get that recognition as public school holidays. Under the de Blasio administration, Eid al-Fitr and Eid al-Adha, as well as the Lunar New Year, were made into public school holidays. Now, many in the Hindu American community, be it the West Indian or South Asian community, voiced their desire for a Hindu holiday to eventually be among that list. Would a Mayor Eric Adams listen to that concern and consider making one of those holidays a public school holiday? It would be a historic move and I think mean a lot to the people in this community.
Elected the first week of January, I'm signing into law the Diwali holiday. Is so important, and we could find the days. What has happened in the past, we've stated that because of the calendar days, we did not have enough calendar days to allow those holidays. But with the combination of remote learning, combination of extending class hours, and a combination of looking into how we have real summer programs, I know we will find the days we need, not only to look at Diwali, but there's a few other holidays that I think is unfair that we allow schools to be closed for other holidays and ignore the holidays of our large immigrant, Caribbean, and other populations. But trust me when I tell you, you will have that Diwali holiday that's taken too long so far.
Thank you, Mr. Adams. Now, Mr. Miller, you're running for city council as well, so I'll just ask you the question: what's your position on making Diwali and/or Holi a holiday at some point, a public school holiday?
I agree with the borough president. And so if you need a council member to introduce that legislation to the city council, it will be me. And I'll make sure get in and get passed by the city council so it can be signed by the mayor. Because it's not fair for the Hindu community to be without their holiest holidays. It's a growing population in the city. And quite frankly, like the borough president mentioned, with the advent of remote learning and other creative ways we can start looking at other holidays that have been existing in our city for a long time. You know, do we need so many days for certain holidays? You know, we can figure it out. And I think it just takes a little bit of work with the school calendar, but it should be done.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. So I appreciate the answers from both. Thank you, Miller, and thank you, Mr. President. Now, in your races directly this June, could you explain to our viewers how will this race be a little different? There is the new ranked choice voting system. So, Mr. Borough President, if you could explain to our viewers how, when they show up the ballot box this time, it will be different this June, and how that means they may be able to put you in their first or a second choice, and it can help you as you go into later rounds of the race.
This election is the first time we're going to have 3 changes. One, early voting. Voting starts from June 12th to the 22nd. Number 2, we're going to move the election from September to the month of June. This was not done before. So this is the first time we're going to have primaries in June. And number 3, we're going to have something called ranked choice voting. Every voter has an option of ranking their candidates up to 5 candidates. And this is very important because the system now will state if someone or a candidate fails to get 50% in the first round, we're going to look at the number 2 choices that voters decided to choose and add up those numbers. And based on that, you'll keep doing it until you reach a point that one of the candidates obtains over 50%, 50 plus 1, I believe it is. And that is how you're going to determine the winner. And so it is crucial that you rank your candidates. You're not required to rank all 5. If you're going in with me, I say just rank once, and that's Eric. But you have an option to rank up to 5 candidates. So this is extremely new, and we need education out there so people can understand how to use this new system.
Thank you, Mr. Adams. So I'll just give an example to those in the audience who may be voting in June. So say the top 3 candidates in the race in the first round are Andrew Yang, Eric Adams, Scott Stringer. But when you went in to vote for Scott Stringer, if you put Scott Stringer 1 and Eric Adams 2, eventually when Scott Stringer gets knocked out as the rounds go on, the counting of the vote goes on, if you put Eric Adams as your second choice, your vote can be transferred by the ranked choice system to Eric Adams. And as the rounds go on, even if at first it was Andrew Yang, Eric Adams, Scott Stringer, if you put Eric Adams is your choice, number 2, etc. As the ballots are consolidated in the later rounds, Eric Adams can be first, Andrew Yang can be second. So that vote, to have him as your second choice, hypothetically, though we hope he's your first, it could make a huge difference in the way the race goes on. So it's an important thing, and as you said, there should be more information available to voters on how it is, because it's the first time it's been done in the New York Democratic primary. So, Mr. Adams, while I have you on, I'll just ask you a few more questions. One thing that I have found interesting about you is you were someone who had diabetes, and you publicly spoke about how you became a healthy eater and you were able to deal with your health issues. Now, as New York recovers from the pandemic, and a lot of immigrant communities were hit hard for a variety of reasons, access to healthcare, and also we have a lot of pre-existing conditions, and our diet can be one of the issues for that. How would a Mayor Eric Adams lead a public health campaign of sorts to help those in the immigrant and minority communities deal with issues such as their diet and pre-existing conditions, so the next time, if there ever is a pandemic of sorts, it doesn't hit us as hard as it did this time?
That's a great question. And healthcare should involve options and information. And you were right. 90% of the people who were hospitalized from COVID-19 had pre-existing conditions. Over 90% of the people who died had pre-existing conditions or something called comorbidities. And if we would have played a greater role of giving people the right nutrition, the right options, and the right information, we could have assisted people in building their immune systems and allowed them to really have a better chance of fighting off the COVID virus. And so my battle with diabetes that led to vision loss in my left eye and permanent nerve damage, as well as high blood pressure and cholesterol problems. It was when I looked at some of the options of lifestyle medicine, I was able to reverse my diabetes, reverse my vision loss, and reverse my nerve damage without having to use insulin or other medicines. And so as the mayor of this city, I'm going to use the health and hospital to give people options and information so that they can go down the path of lifestyle medicine and reversing diabetes or limiting the amount of medicine they need, and as well as give them the support system in place. I have an amazing program at Bellevue Hospital where we are showing people how to reverse their chronic diseases, diabetes, heart disease, high blood pressure, all of those diseases that we believe we get them because it's part of our DNA. No, it's not part of our DNA, I like to say. It's part of our dinner. If we change what we eat, we're going to change our health. And I want to give people those options.
Thank you, Mr. Adams. And what you said just now reminded me a bit of something that happened in my personal. So you mentioned Bellevue, and you mentioned the issue of high blood pressure. So my dad, he had high blood pressure, and he eventually, unfortunately, had a stroke. But one of the reasons that I was able to recover, at least academically in life at the time, is because I was going to a good public school in New York City. But unfortunately, not all public schools are equal in New York. I was lucky to have been going to a good one. But if you are the mayor of New York, how would you deal with the issue of education equality? I mean, in the past year, we've talked a lot about the issue of racial inequities in this country. Some people use the phrase systemic racism. But if you look at the New York City public school system, we are a very liberal city, but we have one of the most segregated school systems in the country. It's been reported by numerous organizations. So how would a Mayor Eric Adams create more equality within our public school system? So whatever your zip code, you have an equal opportunity in the city.
Well, we have betrayed our students in general, but specifically Black, brown, and immigrant students. We have betrayed them because if you don't educate, you will incarcerate. And that's the reason that 80% of the men and women at Rikers Island, our jail system, 80% of them don't have a high school diploma or an equivalency diploma. Over 30% are dyslexic. 55% have learning disabilities. And so when you look at that system, it states the failure is not the crimes that they may have committed. The failure is the crime that we did not educate them. And we have to be honest about not only our schools are segregated, but the city is segregated. And there must be a holistic approach to improve the qualities of our schools. And that means upzoning in affluent areas so that we could have poorer people move into affluent communities so that they can have access to the good schools, good transportation, access to good food, healthy food. We can't continue to displace long-term residents in poor communities. And we need to look at our school system to ensure that all of our schools receive a quality educational environment. And we have to bring back the joy of learning, move away from high-stake testing, expose our children to opportunities, have real internship programs, really have technology that would allow our children to be prepared for the future. And then what's extremely important, we have to move away from the concept of schooling and into a place of educating. Our children are not being prepared for the future, and we need to look at the jobs that are available deep into the 21st century, and we need to ensure that our children are receiving the skills they need to fill those jobs: critical thinking, communication, working in group, financial literacy. Our entire educational system must be revamped to be ready for the future and not continue to exist in the past. I have to excuse myself. I have another Zoom. It's like I'm zooming my life away, but I would like to come on again and have other conversations.
We really appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Adams, for your time tonight and coming on. I mean, I know you have another Zoom to go to, but if you just have a quick closing message to our audience, the community, and just repeat back the voting information and how they can get involved anyway in your campaign, support you.
Well, they can go to Eric Adams 2021, and there's a link to my volunteer screen. And I look forward to anyone who would like to be part of our team. We're excited about the next few days. And I believe it's important as we cycle out of COVID-19, we can't cycle out the way we cycled in. Many people say they want the city to go back to happier days, but this city was not happy for far too many New Yorkers. It wasn't happy for people who lived in NYC that could not have heat, hot water, or could not get lead paint out of their homes. It was not happy for people who were living in homeless shelters. It was not happy for parents who could not get resources for their children so they can have an opportunity to thrive in the city. So happier days to me are those days when we end the inequalities that we see in the city, and every child, every family have an opportunity to live and prosper in the city of New York. And that is the city I'm moving towards, and that's the city that we're going to build when I become the mayor of this great city. And so again, thank you so much. The Guyanese community is a powerful voting bloc. I would love their support, and I want to energize them and give them the faith that they're going to be represented well with Eric Adams being your mayor. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much once again. Mr. Eric Adams, Brooklyn Borough President and candidate for Mayor of New York. The Democrat primary is this June. Thank you once again, Mr. Eric.
Thank you. Take care, Harold. Good seeing you.
Good seeing you, Borough President. Look forward to working with him.
Once again, thank you to Borough President Eric Adams. Mr. Miller, I'll just direct a question to you based on what I was asking Mr. Adams about the public school system. So if you were elected as a city council member in Queens, especially in the district you're running in, unfortunately, our outer boroughs such as Queens, their public schools have been left behind in certain ways. I mean, I'll just speak quite frankly. If you're a Guyanese, hardworking Guyanese immigrant and trying to send your kid to a good school in Queens, you're probably not looking at the public schools. You're probably looking at maybe a Catholic school or some other school, and that costs money, takes away from your hardworking income. So you don't really get what other New Yorkers and other zip codes are entitled to. How would you work to combat that issue?
Well, we first, some exciting news on the state level is that there is additional funding for our public schools coming down from the state this year. We phase in over the next 3 years to actually create a more equitable funding stream for all our public schools. And so as a city council member, I will make sure that those dollars that's coming into the school districts that I represent will actually get directly into those classrooms, and making sure that as a council member, I have a hands-on approach to making sure those dollars are in the classroom, making sure we modernize our classroom spaces, making sure we're building additional space, making sure our teachers are equipped to teach for the rest of this 21st century. And it will take the approach in the entire city to have that, same outlook. That's why I was excited to hear the borough president speak earlier about, what his vision is for education reform, because it's very much in line of what I will do as a council member, and of supporting that and making sure that we are creating a school system that doesn't leave any child behind, and that makes sure that resources are there for those who need it the most.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Mr. Jonas, I have a question for you. It's hard to go over the New York and Guyana politics and include them all sometimes. But Mr. Jonas, connecting New York and Guyana, recently we have had the story in the news of a Guyanese man smuggling finches in hair rollers caught at JFK Airport. And unfortunately, it's not the first time something like this has happened. If you look back, there was a case a few months ago, a case in 2020, a case in 2019. And unfortunately for the Guyanese community, we sometimes get represented by these bizarre stories of smuggling finches, for instance. Now, when you read the stories of why these individuals say that they do these types of offenses, they say, oh, they did it for their family, or they did it for some reason or another, because it is a profitable business, apparently. Now, how could we as Guyanese and Guyanese Americans work together as society to try to prevent these sort of bizarre instances or bizarre crimes not only happening, but representing us in ways?
First of all, it was a pleasure listening to Mr. Adams. I'm hearing his point of view, and I haven't been introduced to him before, so it was nice to hear what he had to say. So I didn't mind being part of the audience during that exchange. It was a learning experience. Smuggling has two sides to it. The profit comes from the sales, and if you look at the drug trade, drug is recreational. It's also addictive. So you can direct your attention to where it's sourced, and then you direct your attention at the end user. I think that it's an embarrassment that we continue to try to smuggle out of the country species that are protected for the sake of profit. But profit is always the force that drives humanity. So I think that some attention needs to be paid to where the market is. The people who are buying these birds, using them, caging them, often good, well-intentioned people who don't really appreciate the extent of the harm being done and the wrong being done. So an education program, certainly, but also a policy of finding the end users and letting them know that they are equally culpable and equally to be punished.
Thank you, Mr. Jonas. So do you see these crimes as some sort of a crime of desperation, where these individuals say they do it for their family in some cases, and like focusing more on the societal issue? How do you think? Because usually these cases are individuals in Guyana, they're traveling to the United States and they're smuggling. How do you think specifically in Guyana we could deal with the societal issue? The societal issues that lead to it.
One of the ironies with the third world interfacing with the first world is exactly that. The realities are different on the ground here, in contradistinction to the first world. If you take the feed my family argument seriously, the same would probably then apply to Colombia. So I think that we have to identify a crime identify why it's wrong, and identify an appropriate response, which isn't always only a penalty, a punishment, but also identifying who the real culprits are, the end users. Um, a person who has the wherewithal to source protected species, find a way to hide them, fly up to New York and have a market to sell them. I don't really want to hear too much from him about the need to feed his family. He has the resources to find another way to feed his family. But I also think it's a bit simplistic to reject that. We are dealing with the third world and third world resources and first world resources. And if you think about the drug trade and you draw a parallel, and you think about the resources that America has put in to fighting the drug trade, not just in America, but also in South America, where it's sourced from. They do that because they perceive the harm done to their people from the illegal trade. Now, with the shoe on the other foot, we don't have those resources. We can't go and stick our nose into American business and tell them how to deal with bird smuggling there. But the solution can only be identifying the market and closing the market down, doing the best we can with those resources.
Thank you, Mr. Jonas. Now, I have a question to Mr. Mill about, well, connected back to Guyana just now. So, Mr. Mill, in your campaign, you have spoken a lot about the endorsements you receive from unions, and you are a pro-union candidate. Could you speak more on that issue? And as a Democrat running this community, what do you plan on your relationship being with the unions, and what's your position on the issue of unionization? Because it is an issue that I'd say it was huge in American politics in the 20th century. It died down recently, but it has been coming up back recently as well. In our news recently, the attempts to unionize at that Amazon plant in Bessemer got nationwide, in some cases international attention. It failed, but the issue of unions has been prominent in American politics recently at a level that it hasn't been in years. So I found that you and your endorsements from unions was very interesting. I think you had a post recently with the Teamsters. So I was wondering if you could talk more about your campaign platform on the issue of workers' rights and unionization.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm very proud of the union endorsements I have, including the hotel workers in New York City called the Hotel Trades Council, as well as food service workers, Unite Here Local 100. I stood the last 2 weeks on a picket line, that's right at the edge of my district. UPS, United Parcel Service, has fired 10 workers from one of the local distribution sites. 2 of those 10 workers were pregnant women. And the reason why they fired them, because they refused to work additional hours. These are part-time workers, and they were required only to work up to like 5 hours. And their managers wanted them to work additional hours because they're short-staffed. However, these folks had other business to attend to, whether to their families, to school, to other jobs, and they were unfairly fired. And so I've been standing with them for the last 2 weeks, demanding that UPS rehires them. And it speaks to my work over the years of standing for workers' rights. When you're in a system that large corporations find you replaceable, it's critical to have an organizing unit to protect you and protect your coworkers. And so in the city council, I'm going to, continue to advocate and continue to work alongside the unions in the city. New York is a very much a pro-union town, and making sure that we are protect the rights of workers overall. And specifically in District 27 has a large number of households that belong to unions. all sorts of unions, whether it be Teamsters, whether it be SCIU, whether it be hotel trades, as I mentioned, teachers union, other service sector and building trade unions exist in our district. And so it's important that we continue to protect and expand the ability to have workers have the right to organize and collectively bargain, because here we have such powerful corporations and powerful municipalities. It can be very overwhelming without those worker protections for an individual employee of those systems.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Mr. Jonas, so in Guyanese history as well, unions have been very important, and I know that on this show, there have been leaders of trade unions at times coming on the show talking about unions in Guyana in the modern day. I was just wondering, to make the connection, New York and Guyana, how important do you believe unionization, and or the struggle for workers' rights, etc., is in Guyana today? What is the importance of the union in modern Guyana? Mr. Jonas? I think he's on mute. Yeah, sorry.
That's a really difficult question, Rusat. Unlike in England, for example, where the unions pulled themselves up by their bootstraps and really had to fight for recognition. I'm sure as a law student you know trade union recognition in 1903. Previously, trade unions per se were illegal as inducing breaches of contract between the employer and employee and that kind of thing. So they had to fight a hard fight, first of all, to get legal recognition, and then to get employer recognition, and then to evolve a statutory formula of being able to interface with the employers. In Guyana, it was different. In Guyana, from independence and before, the unionists benefited from that base, that foundation that had been laid for them. So the statutory structure existed, protected the unions, the constitutional right to join a union, your right as an employee not to be fired because of your association with a union or your involvement in industrial activity. So the unions here had a head start, but part of our centralization of power in the government of the day meant that as part of that statutory codification and as part of that head start, there was politicization. So that our unions are really, I'm afraid, too politicized and often seen just as alter egos of the politicians themselves. Public sector union is seen as very APNU-based. GAU is seen as very PPP-based. It's unfortunate, because what it does is it removes trust at the employee level, but it also removes independent bargaining ability at the union level, especially if they are bargaining against a comrade. So trade unionism is very important, but the entire motto underlying trade unionism is that there is strength in numbers, there's strength in unity. And unfortunately, those numbers and that unity may be lacking in Guyana because of the mutual distrust and the politicization and polarization.
Thank you, Mr. Jonas. So, Mr. Miller, another issue important to your campaign platform is the issue of transportation. So, in the Queens community, I guess you might say that the access to public transportation isn't the same as it is, say, in Manhattan. I mean, if you're at a certain part in Queens, probably very far away from the E train on one end or the A train on the other. Buses can often be very slow, etc. So, what is your proposals relating to transportation? And if you're a city council member, come next year, how would you help out the community with the issue of transportation, public transit?
Well, yeah. So just to those who may not know the terrain of Southeast Queens, large parts of Southeast Queens are not connected to our New York City subway system. So many of us are relying on buses, commuter vans, our own cars just to get from point A to point B. And so when I'm in the city council, one of the first things I want to do is work with the MTA to do two things. One, work with the MTA to expand bus service that goes from Southeast Queens into the centers of where work is, whether it be Lower Manhattan's, Midtown Manhattan, downtown Brooklyn, Long Island City, Queens. We need to have additional access to rapid bus service to those places where people go to work, and have the ability to have express service to go back and forth from Southeast Queens to those districts. Secondly, what we currently have in Southeast Queens is what's called the Atlantic Ticket. So we have a commuter rail line called the Long Island Railroad. That's primary function is to serve residents of Long Island, but it passed right through, Southeast Queens and into Brooklyn, and then they have two main destination stops: Atlantic Terminal in Brooklyn, and then Penn Station in Manhattan. So we currently have a reduced fare that goes from Southeast Queens to Brooklyn. One of the things I want to work and make sure that we have very shortly is having a reduced fare going from Southeast Queens to Penn Station, Midtown Manhattan. With that, you'll have many more commuters who will forego taking their car and sitting in traffic and taking the Long Island Railroad as a means of getting to work. For far too long, many of my neighbors have suffered trying to figure out ways to get to work as quickly as possible. And if you do not catch a certain train or certain bus at a certain time, it could be upwards of an hour that you're late for your job. And so that's why a lot of folks opt to drive in their own car. But with the advent of the congested pricing that's coming into the city of New York, Southeast Queens and other outer borough communities need to have additional options so folks can avoid paying additional tolls driving their cars into the city. And so if you're going to impose a tax on us for commuting to the city, you need to provide additional resources for us to get into the city. And so that's the central point of my transportation platform, is that we need to have those resources available if you want to reduce the amount of cars that we drive into Manhattan.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Mr. Jonas, I'll just have it's a sort of light question, but on the issue of trains and transportation, sometimes you look at the historical images of Guyana. Some of them were in the news following the passing of Prince Philip, where you had the image of Prince Philip and Queen Elizabeth when they came to Guyana. They were on the railroad train that Guyana had at the time. Do you think that at some point in the future, in your lifetime or mine, that Guyana may have a train system, advanced train system like that again, or light rail system, especially as the world moves towards more encouraging more public transportation, mass transit, to deal with environmental issues and things like that?
I think each society has to look at its own needs and its own peculiarities. If you look at, you learn from your mistakes, you learn from human mistakes by looking at history. And if you look at how transportation systems evolved, both in the States and in England, it started with the train. The train's useful because it's a track, easy to build, relatively little infrastructure involved. Its shortcomings are that it can only run on a regular schedule, so not at your whim. You have to time your life to fit the train, not the other way around. But it was the train that enabled the London sprawl and enabled the move west in the States. So it had its uses. But in both countries, what you'll note is that it has substantially been replaced by roads. that is, I think, inevitable because it gives you greater flexibility. The 18-wheelers carry goods all over the place, and that flexibility is important. So yes, in a place like London, 10 million people, in a place like any other large city, you do need a serious public transportation system to get the masses of humanity from here to there. We got 750,000, and we have a huge geographic area. And our needs are not so much the movement of people from suburbs to city center. Our needs are the movement of agricultural produce from far-flung areas to ports of entry, the movement of goods from Brazil to a port of entry on the coast, the access to the mining industries, the access to the mines, and that needs to be done, in my view, by a road system, a well-planned, well-maintained road system that will also open up real estate and therefore increase land value.
Thank you, Mr. Jonas. So a question to Mr. Miller. Your platform talks a lot about rebuilding from COVID in New York. Now, an issue that's affected a lot of people is the issue of rent and the related issue of mortgage. Now, a lot of tenants haven't been able to pay rent. There's been a moratorium on evictions, so you can't evict. So there's been a lot of backlog rent, and now with the result of backlog rent, you have a lot of small homeowners who aren't able to pay the mortgage that they usually use the rent to pay. So what is your policy towards rent and mortgage in the aftermath of COVID?
Yeah, it's to me, it will be the big story of the rest of 2021 into 2022, housing security overall. And right now, we have an opportunity to, stabilize our housing market, if we are to utilize the resources that's coming down from the state government into the hands of landlords and tenants to pay back rent and back mortgages. And as a member of the city council, I will ensure that we look to ways to keep people in their homes and fight against displacement. We are faced with a unique challenge in New York City where gentrification and the cost of living has dominated our city for the last 15 to 20 years. And COVID has currently stopped it, but as soon as the pandemic ends, could potentially exacerbate it greatly. And so when I'm in the city council, one of the things we will want to do is make sure that we put stronger protections to protect tenants from harassment of landlords, and to ensure that they're not easily displaced out of their apartments. And as for homeowners, we have many homeowners who are faced with foreclosures and suffering the effects of deed fraud, and want to make sure in those cases that we work with the state government to provide mandatory mediation with the banks, and making sure that resources are provided for homeowners to catch up on their mortgage. The other thing I propose, because we have a lot of older homeowners, is a second generation grant, because one of the things I hear on the doors is that we have someone who has lived in their house for 40, 50 years. They're ready to either move back to Guyana, move to Florida, and want to pass on their homes to their children or grandchildren or niece or nephew. And the next of kin may not have the resources available to purchase their home. A similar situation that happened with my mother and me, where she sold the family house, but I didn't have the finances at the time to purchase it from her. It took me additional 3 years before I could buy my own home. And so one of the things I'm proposing is that we have a second generation grant that is a fund that will help potential homeowners to purchase their relative's home, how would like some disrepairs on the house, back taxes, or refinancing of the mortgage, whatever is needed at that point. So the housing situation in New York is one I'm very concerned about, and one that we will have to have a holistic approach of looking at making sure we address our homelessness problem, displacement, as well as making sure homeowners are protected against foreclosures.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Now, you mentioned people moving to Florida. I know it's said in passing related to something else, but it has been something that's happened a lot in New York over the past year. A lot of, and not just the past year in particular, though the trend was surged in a way since COVID. But New York has been losing people. I mean, if you look at the census, we are going to lose a House seat as a result of the new census, while Florida is going to gain House seats. And a lot of New Yorkers, they're moving to states like Florida. And one of the reasons that a lot of people say is a lower tax rate in Florida. Now, in New York, we're a state where our government, we spend a lot on programs, and the taxes in New York are higher than many other states in the country. Now, if you're a city council member and you have to help New York rebuild after COVID, how do you deal with this issue that you have a lot of New Yorkers who tend to be more of the high income earners who left New York to go to a low tax state, and now you're a city in recovery that has to do a lot of spending and will probably at some point have to raise taxes again to pay for that?
Well, on the premise that high income earners are leaving the state is I will dispute to a certain extent, because
I'll just say that I'm not the only one saying. Governor Cuomo had a press conference where he was saying the exact same thing. He's trying to mock de Blasio. So it's a point that's been around. I just want to know, if you're a city council member, how would you deal with that?
Yeah. So no. Well, what I want to say is that when it comes to our recovery, it got to be a fair recovery, and we have to look after our most vulnerable. That doesn't mean that we want to tax people to drive them out of the city. But for a long time, the wealthiest of New Yorkers have not been paying their fair share, in my opinion, and many others' opinion. This is still the greatest place in the world to live, in my opinion. Whether you're an immigrant coming in to make a life for you and your family, or you're a multi-billionaire, because of all the resources that New York has to offer. And I will predict that those who are on the wealthier side are not going to leave over small increment increases in taxes. There may be other reasons that they may leave, but at the same time, the wealthiest of New Yorkers have made money during this pandemic period. Has actually their fortunes has gained tremendously. And so all those who are on the progressive end, like myself, are saying is that we want to make sure that they pay their fair share, so we can actually have a recovery effort to make New York City even better, the same city that they're benefiting from, their workforce that they need to get from home to work quickly and safely as possible. And so to those who are the wealthiest of New Yorkers, it will be an investment for their own bottom line to make sure that New York has a well-resourced tax base, so we can make sure we are funding schools, fire, our healthcare system, our infrastructure, our transportation, our water, our energy, because they're the ones who actually benefited the most out of what New York has to offer. And so, so I will hope that they take that perspective when considering where to live and where they claim residency, especially those who have made so much money here in New York to begin with.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. And I mean, I definitely agree that this is still the greatest city to live in. I mean, so it is the greatest city in the world, in my view. But in terms of New York building back from COVID, one of the final questions that I have for you, and I'll have a version of it for Mr. Jonas as well, is we're in May and we're approaching, well, it's a little over a year since the pandemic started. In New York, at least, many of the kids have spent the past year behind a computer screen rather than in the classroom. So us students graduate this May, June, and finish another year of online school, and they live in the city that is in recovery. How would you, if you're in the city council, help make sure that there are enough opportunities for the diverse set of New Yorkers to keep the faith in the city, stay in the city, work in the city, and continue to believe in it? Because it's been, as you reference, a pandemic and crisis that's economically and in the health sense too hit different class sectors in a disproportionate manner.
That's a great question. And I will say this, that is part of the reason why I'm running. We're faced with a situation that's unprecedented. I mean, none of us was here when the 1918 pandemic ravaged the world. And so what leadership looks like in New York City or in Guyana or across the country and the world as we know it, and how they respond to this pandemic over the next few years will set the course for the rest of the century, in my opinion. And so the things that we'll have to do is make sure, one, that the inequalities that led to the exposure of, that this pandemic had exposed, economic inequalities, healthcare disparities, education inequalities, and technology, the technological divide, that we address it once and for all and close that gap. We have to show a robust effort to make sure that we are addressing the healthcare needs. As the borough president stated earlier, that the majority of those who died from COVID-19 had pre-existing health conditions. We can do something about that here in New York. We can make sure that we have a world-class health system and make sure that we establish a culture of healthy eating in our city. We also saw, that our education system has a huge digital divide where we have many students without the technology to do remote learning. We know that we can do something about that, and we have to make sure that, every home in the city has access to broadband, that every child has access to the latest technologies so they can have optimal learning. And then we have to make sure our schools ourselves are equipped and built for the rest of the century style learning. And then we also see that when it comes to job loss and job recovery, that our essential workers, and many of them are some of the lowest paid, but they're the first ones that had to go back to work, or the ones who had to continuously work during this pandemic. Those who work in grocery stores, those who work for UPS and the post office, and McDonald's and other service sector jobs. We have to make sure that they're paid living wages, and so they actually can afford to live in the city. And so where we had these companies, these Fortune 500 companies making so much money and made so much money over the years, making sure that they're paying their workers a fair and decent wages will be part of the fair recovery that we need to have in this city. And so there's many other parts of it that we can go into, but those are some of what I tell somebody. In order for us to come out successfully from this pandemic, we have to learn the lessons of what made this pandemic so horrific to us, and that's the healthcare, economic, and educational disparities that our city has faced with.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. So, Mr. Jonas, to change the question a little bit to you, one of the crises that many countries will face coming out of this pandemic is that a lot of our young people had to deal with many different adjustments, education, etc., during the pandemic, and building back from that, trying to prevent our young people from being left behind based on what they've experienced over the past, I think it's 13 months at this point, right? So if Timothy Jonas, senior counsel, was invited to give a speech in Guyana to the young people as another year of school finishes, what would his message be to them on what opportunities there is in a modern Guyana, and especially how to come out of this crisis that Guyana and the rest of the world has been in?
I noticed that part of that question goes to education. The access to information that the school age population enjoys now, when I interact with them, and I interact with teenagers, A-level, O-level age people, the extent of general knowledge is impressive always. They have a grasp of world affairs, they have a grasp of general geography, history, that kind of thing. And I think that when you speak to them now, you realize that they have used their time away from school along exactly those the same pursuits. So the same grasp of general knowledge, the same, they're very articulate, they're very fluent. What I find has happened though, and this is the one criticism I would make, is that often they mistake a 20-minute Google search for real research. And therefore, often the knowledge is more superficial than it should be. Now, we're talking about the students, but I really think that it's more important for the teachers to appreciate the difference in the learning methods and the availability of information, and to channel the new systems of learning and the new sources of information to encourage their students to use that information not to be superficial, but to genuinely do the kind of research that is necessary to get a good grasp. Now, I think there are more opportunities in the virtual environment in terms of learning information. I think that the shortcomings may have to do with socialization. There's a lot to be said for the knocking a football around, rubbing shoulders, the interaction that takes place in school, and that is lost. So there needs to be a way for that to be recaptured, whether it's through sports, whether it's through extracurricular programs, whatever. But to me, the adjustment has to be made at the level of the educator, because the student is already adjusted. The students are there, they're doing what they've always done. And unfortunately, our failing is that we are so rigidly focused on the 3 R's that often we lose sight of the fact that education is about much more than that. Education is about fitting into society and the end product that comes out of the system that contributes back to society. And that involves a much more rounded approach than just the 3 R's. So hopefully the educators can adjust, the education system can adjust, and benefit from the new and much greater information that is there, but also channel it so that we really do have an educated, rounded end result at the end of it.
Thank you, Mr. Jonas. So we have just passed 8:30, and this is usually the closing time for the program. So we'll wrap up now. I'll have a closing message from Harold Miller, some final comments from Timothy Jonas, and then we'll wrap up the program. So, Mr. Miller, what is your closing message to our audience?
One, just thank you, and pleasure being in this conversation with Mr. Jonas as well today, and look forward to the next 8 weeks of campaigning. For those who are in the Southeast Queens area and hearing my message and would like to be more involved in our campaign or learn more about it, you can always go to Harold4council.com. That's Harold, that's the number 4council.com to learn more. You can also follow me on social media, on Facebook or on Twitter. My Twitter handle is at Harold C. Miller, and as well as Instagram. And so I'm about making sure we have a council member that's getting things done. I will be that council member when elected to be able to go in and work with the mayor, my council colleagues, other government officials to make sure resources are coming back into our community. But the only way that will happen if I get elected. And so if you like what you hear as a message, please reach out, sign up to volunteer for our campaign. We have 8 weeks to go, and look forward to the next 8 weeks getting my message out there. And I greatly appreciate this platform and this opportunity to do so here. And, happy to be back again at some point soon.
Well, thank you once again, Mr. Miller, for coming on. We really do appreciate it. For our audience, once again, the 2021 New York elections, the Democrat primary is in June. So Mr. Miller is running in District 27. So just to go over once again the way the elections are working. So 2021 New York elections, our city council seats are up, as well as the election for the citywide positions such as mayor. So city council will be your district. So if you're in District 27, which includes areas such as Jamaica, Queens, you can vote for Harold Miller. And across the city, races such as comptroller as well as mayor, which Eric Adams is running for, will also be up. So you have the Democrat primary that's taking place this June, and in New York, a city that tends to be 6-1 Democrat to Republican. That often ends up deciding the winner of the general election that takes place in November. So in the Democratic primary this June, you can vote for Harold Miller or Eric Adams. The system this year, as we mentioned earlier, is a ranked choice voting system. So that means you can actually, when you go in, let's take Mr. Miller, for example, he's running in a crowded field. Mr. Adams is also running in a crowded field. You go in, you'll have about a dozen different candidates. You can rank 5 of them. Obviously, the candidate, such as Mr. Miller, would prefer you to rank him first, but it's also important that you have the option of ranking him second in the event that you do like someone else. That can also be very helpful to a candidate because as the tabulation occurs, as the vote counting occurs, certain candidates will be knocked off. So let's say you have 8 candidates, the candidate who received the least amount of votes will be knocked off. Now, the person you put in as your second choice vote, your vote is going to be transferred to that person. It sounds like a complicated system. It is, and there should be a lot of information going around about it since it is the first time it's happening in New York. But it's important to know in a crowded field such as the one Mr. Miller's and such as the one Mr. Adams is in, it can end up making all the difference. So, for example, Mr. Adams is currently in second place in the polling against Mr. Yang in a crowded field of over a dozen candidates. If, let's say, you voted for Scott Stringer but put Adams second, and Scott Stringer gets knocked out, that could make the difference and put Adams over the top against Yang as the tabulation goes on in the final round. So it's a very interesting system. It's being implemented in New York for the first time, and it could make all the difference in the crowded races. But we are very appreciative that candidates such as Harold Miller and Eric Adams came on our program tonight. And I'll just pass it on to Mr. Jonas for his final remarks.
It was very interesting, enlightening listening to Mr. Miller. His sincerity comes across, and he is clearly focused on helping the disadvantaged. So he has spoken about the need for internet access to those who do not have sufficient broadband access. He's spoken to the need for taxation to help improve health and education. And he's spoken to protection of the tenants in a crowded housing environment. Tenants traditionally being less privileged. They don't own their own houses. So I get the impression from him that he is close to the ground. He did not start at the top, he started at the bottom. And I wish to express appreciation for the sincerity that I feel in his views. He will forgive me for saying this as someone who comes from the third world, that Karl Marx pointed out that socialism evolves out of capitalism. And although socialism is still a bad word in the States, a lot of the concepts that you're talking about work very well in France and in England. And I wish you luck, and I hope that you succeed in where you're going.
Thank you, Mr. Jonas. And yes, I believe in entrepreneurship, but also believe in making sure that people can live with dignity. So that balance that we try to achieve here. And, so folks have a right to earn, but also a right to not be exploited. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jonas, and thank you, Mr. Miller. I'll give you one light question to both of you. As we're at 8:39 now. I know a lot of our viewers probably at 9 p.m. tonight will tune into Joe Biden's speech. He's giving his address to a joint session of Congress. What do you guys think of the first? It's his 100th day in office. What do you think of how the Biden 100 days have gone, and what do you expect in the speech tonight if you are watching? Mr. Miller first, and then Mr. Jonas.
Considering, he has such a low bar to start from, considering our previous president, I think President Biden has done a tremendous job in, helping us to finally have leadership on the recovery effort on COVID. The stimulus plan is going to have huge benefits to our country overall. And the fact that he's putting forth together a bold infrastructure plan is very welcoming to many of Americans. And, politics is such a, it sometimes, doesn't describe exactly what people feel on the ground. You may hear Republicans in opposition of it, but the reality is in their districts and their home districts, I'm sure they'll be very supportive of these plans, but the politics of Democrat versus Republican are going to get in the way, unfortunately, in my opinion. And so hopefully in the speech, he can convey a message of that this is a benefit to all Americans and try to get above the partisan rhetoric that both sides kind of play into, because we do have an opportunity to really rebuild our country for the rest of the century. And we have to take this opportunity now in order to do so. And also on a personal note, this is going to be exciting to see a female vice president, a Black / Indian woman in Kamala Harris sitting right behind, as well as the Speaker of the House with Nancy Pelosi. And so if I was going to allow my kids to stay up a few minutes late, I just want them to see that image of, women in leadership in this country, which has been long overdue, but it overjoys my heart to see someone like Kamala Harris being our vice president. And so just that alone, I'm going to watch the joint session of Congress tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Mr. Jonas, somebody from Guyana who is looking at what has gone on in the U.S. I remember we talked in January about your thoughts on the new administration. I think the transition just occurred at that time. What is your thoughts being watching the developments in the U.S. over the first 100 days of the Biden administration?
Well, my first impression of the gentleman was at his age, I'm not seeing much energy, and I was wrong. He's done a lot. Mr. Miller spoke about internally, but in terms of foreign affairs, he's also corrected a lot of ills that have been done. He's restored the U.S. standing in its European relations, restored confidence in WHO, and has extended a hand there in the United Nations. He has shown support and has undertaken American support for a lot of the international organizations that depend on the US, but that do so much good internationally, and in respect of which former President Trump was so dismissive. So we have seen a lot in terms of the restoration of America's stature internationally, and I think that is equally important, and hopefully we will see more of the same.
Thank you, Mr. Jonas. So we will wrap up now. Once again, we thank our guests, Timothy Jonas and Harold Miller, as well as Mr. Eric Adams, for having appeared on the program tonight. I think it was a very good program. We tried to do our best to cover Guyana as well as New York politics. I hope you enjoyed tonight's program, and thank you all once again for tuning in. I just say to all our viewers, we hope you stay safe, whether you're in the U.S. or Guyana from COVID. I mean, we all see what's going on in India right now, the devastation there. Thoughts and prayers there, and to what's a humanitarian crisis going on. And we all hope that each other, U.S., Guyana, India, wherever you are, that you are staying safe. So take care, have a good night, and thank you once again to all our speakers, Harold Miller, Timothy Jonas, Eric Adams, all our viewers. And thank you once again to Nohar Singh and our producer Derek of Globespan. Our producer Devin, sorry, it's been a long in Devin for the great work he does in Globespan. Thank you once again, and we hope you have a good night.
Take care then, Mr. Miller. See you.